Good evening, everyone. Hi. Thank you all for coming. My name is Bernard. I'm a bookseller here at Politics and Prose. On behalf of the owners and of the staff, I'd like to welcome all of you to this evening's event. As you may already know, Politics and Prose hosts hundreds of in person events, along with our partnered events, supported events, trips, and classes, some of which are held at our partner locations, our branch locations at Union Market and at the Wharf. So please check our website for a full list. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. First and foremost, please turn off or silence your cell phones so as not to disturb the event. For the Q&A, please remember to step up to the microphone over here by the pillar before asking your questions so that everyone can hear and enjoy the conversation. For those of you who want to buy copies of the book, we are selling them at the registers out front. We will be doing a signing after the Q&A, so if you'd like to get your book signed, once again, please line up by the pillar over here. And then we will come by if you want personalization, so just have your book ready for us. And lastly, once the event is complete, we ask that you fold up your chairs, lean them against something sturdy to help us out a bit. Okay, I am honored to introduce Professor Jay Finley to all of you. Professor Jay is an associate professor of Africana Studies at Pomona College, and tonight she is here to talk about her new book, Sass, Black Women's Humor and Humanity. In this thought provoking and thorough work of cultural criticism, Professor Jay explores the use of sass by Black women to combat the many ways that they are marginalized in our society. Using a vast array of examples taken from pop culture to politics and even from her own experience as a stand up comedian, Professor J has created what Publishers Weekly has called an enlightening and rigorous examination of sass as a means of asserting one's power in an oppressive world. They further write that the book is an insightful study of the politics of humor. Um, Tonight, she will be in conversation with Professor L.H. Stallings, who is a professor of Black Studies at Georgetown. So, everyone, let us all welcome Professor J. Finley and Professor L.H. Stallings.
Right. So, thank you for coming out today. I just want to say a few words before we get into this discussion about how great this book is. Um, Jay submitted this to UNC Press under this series called MF, Momentary Futures in Black Studies, that I'm a series editor of. And I just want to read the series description so that you can understand why I'm here today. The series encourages books whose methods and aesthetics allow us to experience Black pleasure, joy, and possibility. Books are transgressive and experimental while also dealing with conflicts that arise with intellectual and artistic boundaries. And so, part of what I like about this project is that it does just that at a moment where there's a lot of questions about whether or not comedy, satire, all these things will survive our current era. But what I will say, in the last 10 years, there's been an increased interest in Black women's comedic tradition, which has led to research by other scholars cracking up Black feminist comedy in the 20th and 21st century by Caitlin Hell Woods, Daniel Fortes Morgan's Laughing to Keep from Dying, and Laughing Mad by Bambi Hangins. But Finley's work is timely, well written, and contributes a distinctive voice. First, by recovering Sass. Some people might think that's outdated and not up to date. But what Finley does is reminds us of the importance of Sass in our 21st century. And so the project does a kind of a lot of good work looking at things initially from Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion's WAP to thinking about conversations around Butch Sass or thinking about African diasporic comics in Nigeria and South Africa. And so, really showing us that this tradition is basically expanded in the 21st century, but people just haven't been talking about it in the kind of clever ways that Jay does. And so, I'm really happy to see it out. I hope you'll see that based on some of the questions and conversations that we have. So, should I start with the questions?
Yeah, sure. You can start with the questions,
Okay.
but I'll say thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate y'all choosing to do this with your evening, and I'm really excited about the book, and I hope you all enjoy it. I hope you enjoy this conversation first, and then I hope you enjoy the book.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to go to something that I was hinting at, that critics have insisted that comedy won't survive this current era of criticism and scrutiny of political correctness, of cancel culture. But your book turns to what some might say is this kind of term that's been useful in the past. And you talk about how its foundations are evolving, particularly by Black women. And so I wanted to ask you, is there something that you see as particularly resilient about what you note as Sass at this particular moment?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. People are really thinking about comedy, right, and thinking about the limits of comedy today. Um, but I think one of the things that I found in the work, I think, is that not only are Black women resourceful when it comes to our expressive practices, expressive tools. That might be like the easy answer. Black women are resilient, so that means that we find a way, we make a way out of no way. That might be the easy answer, but I was thinking about reframing, rethinking about that as the enduring nature of Sass, because that's one of the things that I do in the book is really work to historicize that term, and to really capture the essence of what it has meant for Black women. So how have Black women used Sass over time, from the period of when we used to be enslaved to thinking about it now, even on the stand-up comedy stage and even in everyday life, right? So the enduring nature of Sass is owing to the conditions that in which it emerged as something that Black women needed as an expressive technique, right? To speak back to power. And so I think that as long as that those conditions of constraint exist for Black women, right? Anti-Black racism, misogyny, sexism. Whenever there's a need for Black women to speak back to power, there's always going to be a need for Sass. And so you see it transform over time based on the different conditions of constraint, the different conditions in which Black women find themselves. And if I can just go on for just 1 second, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I want people to have from the book is that Sass is really a practice that is done in the moment, right? So to really sort of disabuse people of this idea of the sassy Black woman as, a person who is as a personality trait or something, right? But it's something that people do in the moment as a response that is intentional and that is for the self first. But if you understand what's happening, right? So if you are understanding those conditions of constraint in which Black women have many, many times found themselves, it might be funny to you.
So, can I just follow up on this? So, in the book, you talk about different moments of that. So, can you just offer like some of the examples that it's what it actually is, what Sass actually looks like in these examples of specific moments that all might know about?
Specific moments that we all might know about. Okay, without y'all having to buy the book, but you're gonna buy it. One of my so this also one of the things I thought about was when people pick up this book and they read the title and it says Sass, Black Women's Humor and Humanity. One of the things that I thought was people are going to pick up this book and they're going to think that this is a sort of a history of Black women's comedy. And they say, who is this going to be about? Like Whoopi Goldberg, Moms Mabley, maybe Leslie Jones, or some people that you know in the mainstream. And so one of the things that my goal is to really theorize Black women's humor, right? How is it that we make people laugh, and how is it that people really understand what Black women's humor is and looks like over time? And so that was part of the theory for me, is that really Sass is that the thing that makes Black women's humor legible. That's how we know what it is when a Black woman is speaking back to power intentionally. Once what's underneath the humor, when you find out what's underneath the humor, is always going to be that critique of power when it comes to Sass. So a moment that is, I think people will find surprising, is this moment in the beginning of the first chapter, that talks about Fannie Lou Hamer. Now, Fannie Lou Hamer's name has, of course, been in the news a lot in the past, few months, owing to Kamala Harris ascending to being the Democratic nominee for the president, right? The 1964 Democratic National Convention, right? But there's a moment where I talk about Fannie Lou Hamer and her speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1964, and she recalls this story about hearing a woman being beaten. And there's a certain point where one of the officers who is beating her, he's asking her, he says, can you call me sir? And she says, and she said, yeah, I can. He said, well, so well, then say it. And she said, I don't know you well enough. And so she wasn't meaning for that moment to be funny. She wasn't meaning for that moment to be funny, but that was clearly a moment for her, because she recalled that at the Democratic National Convention in 1964. And again, she would recall that moment in interviews as something that really spoke to her. And that was really, she saw somebody claiming their humanity in that moment. And if you see that, if you understood the conditions in which a Black woman would do that, you might have thought that was funny as well. So I think that's one moment that that was, I think, one of my favorite moments to write about in the book. Who was She was talking to a man who was beating her, a police officer. Yeah, he did.
Okay, thank you. So another kind of in terms of thinking about the chapters, one of the things you do in the book is that you say we ought to challenge the idea that Sass is only recognizably Black feminine discourse, and then you offer up a theory of what you call as butch Sass. So I wanted to ask you, what is butch Sass, and why might it matter for how Black women's comedy tradition has evolved over the last 20 years?
Good one. Yeah. So I came up with this idea of butch Sass, and this came out of the research, the ethnographic research that I did as the person that I am, looking how I look, and trying. So, so I learned how to do stand up comedy. I learned how to write jokes. I've been doing it for now, I guess, almost 15 years as part of my research practice. And so when I was doing the research for this book, one of the things that I really wanted to know is, I saw a lot of Black butch women, or Black women who, have a masculine presentation of self, or a masculine gender sensibility, right? Like what you see looking at you, talking to you right now. And my question was not how do I fit them in to my theory of Sass, but I felt like I was seeing Sass, and rather than relying more on like so heavily on the gestural components of Sass, like cutting your eyes and sucking your teeth, the ones that are like more traditionally known and more associated with like feminine sensibilities. I was like, I was seeing Sass, right? I was seeing Sass because anytime that Black women need to speak back to power, which is often, that's what we're doing, but it was looking different. So I felt like I really needed to really think about how can I account for that? So Butch Sass is really about when Black women make use of the stories about our lives as being masculine women, but also embracing our womanhood at the same time. And so, oh, hey, what's up, y'all? There's some of my students, my former students, welcome. Um, yeah, come on, sit up front, y'all. I'm just playing, you don't have to sit up front. So I was talking about butch sass, this concept that I came up with. So it's really about when Black women use stories about our not only our masculine and so it's at the same time debunking but also embracing norms of what it means to be a woman. So thereby expanding how we understand what it means to be a Black woman in the first place. And if I can give you an example, I'll do a little reading from the book that gives you some clarity on that. So this is from the chapter that it's called "Butch Lives Matter," and in this chapter, okay, here we go. So Sam J is pretty well known in popular culture these days, and she had a late night show on HBO called Pause with Sam J. And so here's one of the things that I write that I think illuminates what butch sass is and what it does. So I'm talking about failure, right? I'm talking about black masculine women and dealing with the idea of being a so-called failed woman. And so so here's the reading. Sam J spotlights this issue in 3 in the Morning. 3 in the Morning is one of her comedy specials. Riffing on the universal experience of bickering with one's significant other in public, Sam J tells the story of being at the airport with her girlfriend who has brought too many bags when a man comes over and offers to help. When men see a masculine woman, that's their favorite shit. They try to come up, stomping, grimacing. I got the real dick, goofy fucks. I got the real dick. Where you want the dick? What bag my dick gotta pick up? Sam J slightly chuckles to herself and he jacks up the bag and looks at me like, now what? Like, nigga, get mine too. You getting bags, you get all the bitches' bags. The fuck you think I am? I'm a lady. Carry my shit. Be a fucking gentleman. Sam J leans into failure, enlivening it and forcing spectators to contend with the interconnections between fear, discipline, and hegemonic power. This sets up a liberatory collision between their ideas about black womanhood. What is the role of failure in black butch women's stand up? And how do they strategically use its dialectical relationship with freedom as a pathway toward an otherwise world where, at the very least, there is an alternative to the disciplinary norms of gender?
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, because this sums up, like, and I think you do a good job of like with these contemporary comics, but also you mentioned like past comics like Marsha Warfield, who couldn't, even though there was like a butchness about her in her performances, but could not be out. And so I think you make a good through line between this kind of libertary process that Sam J can enact versus somebody like Marsha Warfield, who during that time couldn't, but also still understanding that there's this practice, this consciousness about failing at femininity, right?
Mm-hmm.
At failing at femininity that makes the performance and makes the performer all the more kind of inventive and creative versus being having to keep that on the low or not express that. And so showing again that this term sass like is doing something different for different genders of black women in the 21st century, and it's really important work because it's how you get from people who couldn't do that to get into people like Sam J. And so I appreciate that about the chapter.
Yeah,
So thank
if I could quickly
yeah,
follow
yeah.
up on that, I think that's an important point that about thinking about failed womanhood in the sense of like black butch women. But one of the things that I'm also trying to do with Sass and in other chapters, like the chapter on raunchy humor. So what happens when black women are cast outside of the ideas of who a woman is, what a woman can say, what a woman can talk about, how a woman can experience her body. So it's not just that you see it for black butch women, but many, many times you see black women trying, people, you see sort of like power try to clamp down on the idea of what a woman can do, what a woman can say, who she can be. And so I try to address that across a spectrum of different kinds of experience. And so butchness and butch embodiment is one, but also raunchy humor and the use of raunchy humor as an embodied form of sass is something that I also attend to.
So my next question has to do with Sass and diaspora culture, which I thought you did a really good job of illuminating how Sass and like black music can be a site of cultural exchange. But you also note the differences such as language and meaning in the translation of humor and sass when it's not just to US black people or audience that's filled with a diversity of Black people in a different country trying to get this humor. So, what are some of the kind of transnational intimacies that you learned about doing your research and wrote about for the book that are important for continued exchanges of, these distinct elements of Black culture across the diaspora?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that chapter is that I wrote is focuses on the research that I did in South Africa on Black women stand-ups in South Africa, and so I learned a lot during that process. And one of the things, but it didn't. That's not where the work really started for me. So when I was thinking about Sass, I was really trying to think about what kind of work are women doing with like the what I call the cut eye and suck teeth. And by I mean John and Angela Rickford, who published this paper in the 1970s. And they were really trying to understand, like, how is it that so many people across the world really understand these gestures and what they do? And so what they did was they did a study of Black and white women in the U.S., in the Caribbean, and in these different countries in Africa. And what they found was that it was Black women across the board who had the most understanding of what it means to roll your eyes and suck your teeth. Okay, and so that was me really trying to think about the gestural components, but that's not what you do in research. Is go and try to slap your concept from here in the U.S. context onto the people who exist in a whole different context, right? And so one of the things that I found in South Africa is really that was the connecting point was the connection between affect and like discourse. And so, in other words, between feeling and expression. And so what I found was that there was this connection, like like sort of the political affinities that happen in conditions where anti-Black racism and misogyny are the frame society, frame how Black women experience their lives. And so it wasn't about being like, okay, so what does Sass really look like in South Africa? But really it was like, how do Black women speak back to power in that particular context? And so thinking about those kinds of like political affinities or intimacies, I think is something that's important when we continue to think about like something called diaspora culture, right? How different elements of Black culture expression, language, discourse, how do they circulate around the world, and what are the points of connection that we can find?
Yeah, and did a good job of like also showing why this is important in a post-apartheid. Like this is the like you do so much in that chapter. So this is the other thing in terms of like thinking about like how this form of expression and resistance matters in this new kind of South Africa, if you will. And so I thought that was important too. Um,
Can I
oh
have
yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
just a follow up
Yeah.
on that, which is to say that when the context changes, the expressions of Sass changes. So you see it change over time, and I'll just briefly say. So, for example, for me, the primal scene of Sass is the enslaved woman whose master tells her to do something or tries to control her, dominate her in some way, and she rolls her eyes at him. He don't see it though. It's for her. There's no audience for that. The audience is for herself. And so she has just, regarded herself as a human being, right? When the context changed, right? The context of what freedom means changes. So expression might change. So how she might speak back to power might change. You can see that with Michelle Obama. She's a good example. And I talk about Michelle Obama as well in the book. And so in the book, I talk about Michelle Obama, her cut eye that she had at John Boehner at one of those dinners. There's like a real good image of her cutting her eyes, right? But Michelle Obama, when she as a first lady, she was absolutely constrained in terms of the things that she could say, the ways in which she could speak back to what was happening to her husband, right? we see her in a different moment now. So if you watch her DNC speech, I think that's one thing that hopefully that you'll take away from this book is really looking at, okay, how have the conditions changed for her such that she can really do it in a different way that is for herself, but also serves a collective function as well. What she said, what she said was, how does he not know that that job that he's applying for just might be one of them black jobs, right? So that was for her, right? Because she's in that group of people, right? But this is, but that's for an audience, and so you can see how Sass really functions, like in the moment, right? Like we're not gonna call Michelle Obama a sassy black woman, right? But she enacted Sass in these particular moments to speak back at a particular time in a particular place. Yes, we did. We laughed if we are literate, right? In Sass, of course.
So speaking of literate, okay, so this is the kind of thing I'm curious about for you, is that it does, like, SAS requires a type of literacy and comprehension about language and culture, specifically Black language and culture. And so, do you think it will survive this era of like digital memification and AI produced culture and text, or if we gonna just get some horrible imitation pair of this?
You know what's nice? You know what I like about that question? I like I like that question because I feel like the sassy black woman was like the first meme. The sassy black woman is basically a preponderance of affect. You know what I'm talking about? It's just like a somebody who's popping their neck, snapping their fingers, rolling their eyes for no reason, with nothing to say. Right? It's just used for like to give flavor to your episode, to your person, just like some uncritical humor, right? But the sass that I'm theorizing, my sass, I'll say, as I've said a little bit before, I feel like it's enduring. That speaking back in the moment that can't be captured. But unfortunately, the sassy black woman is not only will she not, she's always going to be part of the sort of the lexicon of stereotypes that people understand about black women. And now we're going to have to accept. But I hope that the book really challenges people. Yeah, I think it will. I think if you read this book and then you don't go off in the world understanding how Sass functions in your everyday life, seeing black women's humor everywhere rather than just, when you turn on your TV or turn on your radio or your podcast, you're going to see it in your everyday life when you go to the store, when you go to the car dealership. And underneath that sass is always going to be a critique of power. Always. There is no sass without constraint, because for me, sass is really about the range of possibility, the range of sort of like the range of possible expressions within conditions of constraint. That's what sass is for me. And that can't be memeified. That's something that you're going to see every single day. So it's like, along with those, those little random memes that people send, a woman popping her neck, doing the most, what you're really going to see is power disrobed all the time. You're going to see it all the time.
All right. My last question for you is, what do you hope people take away with their engagement with SAS, with this text?
Um, well, I hope people take away that last point. For one. I really, my biggest hope is to disabuse people of the idea that sass is a personality trait, and that people can be reduced to being sassy. That people will think twice when they use the word sass, and also when they see sass in a new way, it will make them reflect on why did they need to enact sass in that particular moment. My friend, one of my best friends from high school, I asked her. She was one of the people who copy edited this book, and she's not an academic, but she has experience, and she read the book, and she told me after she read it, she said, "Wow, that was dense." But hey, some stuff you got to work for. Some stuff is worth working for. But she said, wow. She was like, this is dense, but nobody has had it harder than Black women, but nobody is more resourceful and has more ingenuity than Black women. So hopefully people will see not just Black women responding to the ways in which they're constrained and subject to all kinds of violence and domination on an everyday basis, from the structural to the everyday walking down the street, but also that we are joyful, and we um, are happy, and we experience pleasure, and sometimes there's pleasure in talking back. So
Thank you. Uh, I guess we could move on to questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask?
of course. So they ask that you go to there's a microphone over here.
Hi.
Hello.
I just saw that this was going to be about humor, so I just came on by because I really wasn't sure. But when I heard the word sass, I thought of growing up. I'm 70, and the word sass, and I just wondered in these contexts or whatever, or in general, is it like um, a subtle form of sarcasm or something like in maybe some other descriptive terms?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe give a little more in depth for the novice as far as the terminology.
As far as the terminology,
Yeah, I'm all into humor and subtlety and intellectual humor and saying things to people that gets them, but it's helpful to get a little insight. That's all.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So I think sass can include sarcasm, absolutely. But sass, so yeah, so you said it's like an old school term, right? So when you used to hear sass, probably when you were a kid, yeah, don't sass me, don't talk back. No, no, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you coming. But if being sarcastic in particular conditions, if that sarcasm is meant to be talking back to somebody who you feel like is trying to who is trying to slight you, so to speak, absolutely it can be. But I'll do a little. You want me to do a little reading, just to give a little bit more insight? Because I wanted to just read a little bit from. Mhm. Okay, okay, will do. Um, all right, so Wanda Sykes. Everybody knows who Wanda Sykes is, right? The comedian on TV. Yeah, she's wonderful, but she really hates the idea, the notion of the sassy Black woman, and she was always talking about it. She because basically what she said was, long story short, she wrote that the sassy Black woman is just going around, snapping her fingers and popping her neck, and she doesn't have anything to say, and she always gets called sassy, and she's like, but I have something to say. And so here's one of the things that this is just from her comedy show. So I'll do a little reading. So hopefully this will illuminate the situation for you. So Wanda Sykes wears a dark three-piece leather suit, and her signature afro brings together her butch presentation in her 2009 special, I'ma Be Me, which was taped in Washington, D.C., right on the heels of Barack Obama's historic presidential election. In one of her first jokes, she covertly criticizes the sassy Black woman. She begins, gotta get used to having a Black first lady. That's why we had all those articles when they first got in office, like, who is the real Michelle Obama? When will we see the real Michelle Obama? You know what they're saying. When are we gonna see this? And so she does this, so I'm doing it for you. uh, and so for a full 20 seconds, Sykes performs this wild finger snapping, hip swirling, talk to the hand gestures, finally punctuated with a repeated exclamation, Mari Povich style. You need to take care of your baby. You need to take care of your baby. Several more seconds of sassy gestures ensue to the delight of the audience, who have been clapping and laughing throughout the bit. In a final motion, before exasperatedly shaking her head at the idea that has heretofore been performed, Sykes delivers a long, slow cut-eye, drawing an intense applause. Well, you're not going to see that from Michelle Obama, she scoffs. And we all don't do that, garnering even more applause. Sykes drags the universalized idea of the sassy black woman represented in her exaggerated gestures and words and simultaneously punctuates her final utterance with a more subtle, slow roll of the eyes. She did it like this. She said, and we all don't do that. So there you go.
Other questions?
Oh.
Some people say Dr. J got her sass from her Aunt D. That's me. So I wanted to ask, your women comedians who specialize in raunch sass or butch sass, do you think in the back of their minds they thought, this is going to make me more successful if if raunch sass and butch sass is my signature? Do you think that they had those thoughts in their mind of being more successful?
Of being more successful by using raunch or butch sass.
Yes.
I don't necessarily think they had in their mind that they were enacting sass, right? I think that they probably had in mind that they were being themselves in a way, right? So owning who it was that they were, and that was going to make them more successful. And that's something that I've learned in the practice of doing comedy, and what I teach my students, right? You know, this is one of my students who I taught comedy to, is, and you can vouch for this, Sion, that you have to go and be yourself. Like, people want to connect with you as a person, and oftentimes if doing you, right? So if being raunchy and using raunchy language, vulgar language, talking about sexuality in ways that have been taboo, for example, in ways that have been considered taboo for certain kinds of women to talk about, I think that to be what people had in the back of their mind, I'm gonna go out there and be myself, and I'm gonna see what happens. Because a lot of the times when you see professional comedians, this is a persona that they have been honing over time, and these are jokes that they have been crafting. And so I don't think they have sass on their mind, but I do think that a lot of women have this idea that they're not gonna let the world dictate what it is that they say. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
you.
So I thank you so much for this. I'm excited to read the book, and I really appreciate the distinction that you're making between sass as you said, a personality trait or a kind of like fixed characteristic of Black women or Black womanhood in general, versus sass as like a strategy, a tool, a kind of set of tactics, right, that can be used to make a political critique. And when I think about when I think about instances in which we see sass like policed or pathologized, I do think a lot about Black girlhood. And this kind of came up in the first question a little bit. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about whether you see first of all, whether Black girlhood and sass kind of come up in the book, and even if not, how you see Black girlhood and the kind of sassy tactics and strategies of Black girls might also be making critiques and kind of, pushing back against power in ways that we need to be thinking about as well.
Thank you so much. That was a great question. And one, in fact, that you can find part of on the literal first page of the book. So there's a quote that I start this chapter with. Sassy conduct is itself a strategy for resisting social devaluation. And so that was Joyce West Stephen, who wrote that in a book called Smart and Sassy. And so she's talking about black girls and black girls using sass in order to sort of like she says to like sort of lodge to make a moral evaluation in certain kinds of situations. So she says that sass is in fact a place where black girls find their resilience. This is where they own themselves as young people, and so they respond to whatever environment. These young black girls, so a lot of them were in urban spaces when she was doing this work, but it's how they respond to the situations in which they find themselves. And so sass is this resource for them. It's this resource that lets them really lay claim to the what they see is the problem and express that. So absolutely, it has to do with black girlhood. And I mean, I think a lot of us who used to be black girls really remember what that's like, to really sort of need to assert yourself, to really need to own yourself, when a lot of times, you feel like there's just so many things that are, pushing against you, trying to constrain you. Wear your hair like this, a girl acts like this, a black girl acts like this, a black girl does this, right? And there's always this need that you feel like that needs to erupt within you. And so that's the thing also about sass that I love so much too, and I hope that people take away, is that at the root, in the source, that it is for yourself. So one of the things that I say in the book is that when you see somebody bring off a gesture of sass, or even they use language, right, to speak back, that's the end point of sass. That's not where it started. Where it started is the interiority of the black girl, or the black woman who dared to own herself, who dared to regard herself as a human being who could speak back and needed to speak back in that moment. Is she generally looking for a response? So sass is thank you for that question back there. Sass is gestural, right? It's a discourse. So this is what I theorize in the book, that sass is a genre of discourse, right? So that means that it can be brought off in a variety of ways. It involves language, style, gesture, but fundamentally and also intention. And does it always need an audience? Well, what it needs first is an audience of the self, right? Because there is no sass if you haven't decided that there's something that needs to be spoken back to, you know. And can I say that what that underneath that, what that really unmasks is really the power relations that made that sass necessary. So go back and think about that enslaved woman, right? Who the sass was for herself. Imagine nobody saw it. She rolled her eyes and it was for herself. But imagine her homegirl, wouldn't be called a homegirl back in the day, but imagine her homegirl saw her roll her eyes, right? And she might have laughed. And you know why she might have thought that was funny? Is because that slave master thought that he had reduced us to non-humans. Non-humans don't talk back. And so you see that in that particular moment where the sass is brought off. Does that make sense?
So there's fiction.
I'm gonna give you this. Okay, no, you can just take this one. It's all right. Just bring it back to me.
So there's fiction and nonfiction and poetry and prose. Uh, do you see sass as becoming a new genre?
I don't think it's a new genre. I think it's an enduring. It has been a genre of discourse, and what I'm trying to do is help people to understand the frame of that genre, right? The context of
So
that.
so you won't take credit for sass as a genre. I'm giving you.
I'll take credit for sass as a genre of discourse. Yeah, that's my theory. That's
Okay.
mine. That's
Okay.
me. That's all me.
Okay.
Pay me.
I'm trying to
I know
make you rich.
I'm very demure. historically it has existed, right? So a lot of people, so some scholars, folklorists and people who do different kind of anthropological and historical research have found it. For example, there's a question of, is Sass an African survival, right? So did it as a did so why is it that Black women across continents, across oceans, across time and space understand cut eye and suck teeth, those, to roll your eyes and suck your teeth, as markers of negative affect in particular ways? So I think that it's always existed? I think that there's always been talking back.
Other cultures, different subtleties, whatever. But
Yeah, but sass is not an ordinary way of talking back. It's not regular. Talking back is, there's different forms of talking back. Sass is a very specific, culturally specific for me, form of expression of talking back. Hmm. A sample of my sass? What you mean? Like a joke?
Yes, yes.
Jeez.
That research of stand-up comedy that based on, yeah. Anything?
Y'all just gonna ask me to do a joke on the spot? Listen, I can't do that. That's not how it works. We make a set, we craft it, we practice, we internalize, and then we come out and do it. Uh, come on, let me think of one, and then I'll do one for you. ID put me on the spot. Leave it to you. Sometimes it be your own. Was this what the class was like? No. Mm-mm. It was not like this. No. Mm-mm.
Maybe someone can think of something really rude to say to you.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, because I feel like even in the book, the way you talk about when you're doing your stand up, it's like part of it's you developing a routine, but also you also taking in what worked or didn't work one
Uh-huh.
time or another. So yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Well, maybe I don't know what was the joke. I had a joke about. Um, I used to shave my head like bald, and Black men would just be the most upset about it. They would be the most upset about it. And so in fact, this was like a theme across a lot of like Black butch comics, was like how men were like so mad that you had made yourself unavailable to them. And so for some reason, like my shaved head would indicate to Black men that like I'm not available. So I had a joke. I said, and it was coming from this experience. I went to, okay, so sometimes I would go to the barber college, I'm talking about the barber college, and I would, because it was cheap, and I was in graduate school, and I would get them to do it for me when I didn't feel like doing it. So I went and I got my head shaved. And he didn't, before he started, he was like, "Are you sure you want to like shave it?" And I was like, "Yeah, just shave all of it." And he was like, "All right." And then I had to talk to him the whole time. And so I wrote a joke, and I said, "A woman with a shaved head is like a closed KFC. The doors are locked tight, but you can see all the legs and thighs and breasts inside." So there's one for you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Yeah.
So I think we're supposed to allow time for signings.
Yeah. So
buy
I'm.
the book, get it signed. Oh, go ahead.
I can close. I wanted to say thank you so much. If we can give a round of applause for a wonderful talk this evening.